The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is Philosophy, Faith, and Education.
Hey everyone, Wade Franson back in the studio, pre-recording today's show. And if all goes well, it will be airing. If all goes well, it's January 25th today. Now, I've been looking forward to this show. We have a returning guest this morning. He has a PhD in the philosophy of religion. He's written a groundbreaking trilogy, the first volume of which is out, the second volume of which is in the editorial process, called A Philosophical War. The third one is what he's working on right now. And this is a new take on the intersection of philosophy and religion. And what originally attracted me to our guest is that he launches this assault on our understanding and awareness of consciousness itself and God from the Garden of Eden, but not as a serpent who's casting doubt, but rather as a light that illustrates what the whole thing was about anyway. And I couldn't be more excited to have him back in the studio as part of what we're calling the New Year's revolution, now that we have got clarity on where we're going in 2026. Welcome to the studio, Joe Atman.
Thank you, as always, for having me, Wade.
Well, it's just an absolute pleasure. And as you know, we've got plans in the works that we're going to unfold and begin unfolding now in a monthly series leading into the spring. I'm up in Wisconsin. It was 5 below this morning. We're going to start the spring thaw process right here. So Joe, you've recently refocused some of your work. And we've had you on the show before, so we're not going to go deep into your background. But for those who don't know Joe, he is the founder of Middle Tree. Middle Tree, many in that company and working with that company don't realize the connection to his work in A Philosophical War and that tree in the middle of the garden. Let's start with just a refresh there. What's going on with Middle Tree these days? Where are you at? I know your role has shifted there a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. So Middle Tree is a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization with a mission basically to make sure that anyone who wants an education, and we do largely tutoring, counseling, after-school services. We work largely with K through 12, but we also got some adult and vocational programs as well. But the mission is to make sure that everyone gets whatever education that they want, need, and deserve. In that we allow for students to come whenever they want, to work on whatever they have to for as long as they need to, and we don't turn anyone away due to finances. So if you've got a third grader who needs just general academic support, but you really can't pay for it, we'll take them on and do it for at whatever cost that family can afford, or if they can't really afford anything, we'll make sure to work it out. If you yourself are a college student, or again, we have some adult and vocational programs. We've just started a new program within the medical field that we're calling allied health, where we're training people to be medical assistants. We've got that at a greatly discounted price to make sure, again, that people can afford these kinds of programs, because so frequently these types of offerings, whether they be, again, tutoring for a high schooler or medical training, they can be so absurdly expensive. And it's our position that education should be a basic right that everyone should have an access to. But then beyond that, it should be something that is disseminated to the student in the way that is best for them. And frequently that way that it is best doesn't happen within a timeline per se. So we make sure that everybody has whatever time that they need to work on whatever it is that they have to work on. So that's basically what it is in a nutshell. And yeah, my role has shifted a little bit. I was the sole administrator for a long time, or at least it felt like a long time, probably about 7 or 8 years. Then started to get some help, pulled more people into the back office, and then that has blossomed into having a number of people doing strictly admin roles in a full-time capacity, about a dozen or so, and we have about 200 and 250 frontline staff workers. That is people who go out into the field and work with our students face to face, out in school districts, out in our centers that are around the state of California. So my role has shifted a little bit to being the sole day-to-day operator. And we've again got a whole staff now in place that takes a lot of those day-to-day tasks off of my plate, and I get to focus on things like this. So.
Well, and you also have been growing a podcast of your own for some time, and you're shifting focus towards that, enhancing it, making some additions and improvements. Want to just share a little bit about that, what it's called, how it's going these days?
Yep. We've got a podcast, it's a Middle Tree podcast that we call Educate Everyone. That's actually our slogan at Middle Tree, is Educate Everyone, because again, that's really part of the mission, is that everyone should be educated, and we bring in educational experts, people within the field of education. And one of the things about education is everybody has an experience with the education in some way or another. Everybody contributes to the field in some way or another. But we've had the good fortune to bring on some really high-level folks, have had some very interesting conversations and discussions about the state of education, how it can be improved, what's going on with it, their own personal experiences with it. I think we all are aware of the fact that education isn't all what it could or should be, especially in the way that we do it, especially in this country. And so we kind of talk about that very candidly. We've had some very open, sometimes, not contentious, but heated discussions about what that should look like, and why people think the way they do, so far as what their vision for shaping education should be. And it's just been fascinating to I've never done a podcast and everybody has a podcast nowadays, right? Of course, but I've never done one. I actually had very little interest in doing one for a long time, largely because of the fact that, as I mentioned previously here, I was inundated on a day-to-day basis. But I got talked into it by Tammy Trujillo, who's this powerhouse in the news radio circuit, and has been on the air for decades and decades, and is if that name is familiar to you, it's for good reason, because she's been all over the airwaves for the last 40 years. And I was on her show called Community Cares a number of years ago, and was on it once, and she really enjoyed apparently our discussion, obviously, and had me back, and she said, you really need to do a podcast. And I was like, I don't, and I've got other things to do, basically. And the idea wasn't just all that appealing to me anyways. And she kept pushing me, and we just wound up doing one together, where she's been the producer of it for this past year plus, since it's been gotten off the ground. And we're changing some of the ways that we do that now. We're getting into a video format, which previously it had been only audio, but now we're going to do video here in 2026. We're excited about that, and I owe a lot to Tammy for getting this project off the ground, and of course you and everyone at Something or Other Publishing has been a huge supporter of not only me but Middle Tree's work as well. So we're excited about what 2026 and beyond has to hold, not just for all of the things that I just mentioned, but for all of the things that we're not even aware of that are going to transpire because of all the things that we're doing here and laying the groundwork for currently.
So in the Baha'i world, to go on a slight tangent and we'll veer it back, evil is explained, frankly, as ignorance, right? And the solution to evil is therefore education. And obviously your focus has been and is that educate everyone. In the world of religion, when we think of evil and we think of theology and we think of the fall, so-called fall in the Garden of Eden, it has to do with that tree in the middle of the garden. And I've shared on my show recently the clarity with which, to me, as Jesus flipped the script on almost everything, even the Apostle Paul followed in that footsteps, where in Romans he says that maturity, when he talks about strong meat, belongs to those rather than milk. When you're an infant and you're drinking milk, you're not weaned yet. He says strong meat belongs to those who by reason of use have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. And when on a recent show I brought this up with a professor from Princeton Theological Seminary who taught systematic theology for years, her reaction was, well, that's not biblical. I was like, well, it's straight out of the Bible. And she was kind of caught off guard by that idea, and I could see her like chewing on it. And by the way, we have a great relationship. We'll have her back on the show. This was not some confrontation. It was just simply an exploration. But the point is, as we mature, the intent really is, according to that verse from Paul, that we discern good and evil through the exercise of our senses, through applying ourselves in the real world, scientifically, if you will, exploring, testing our hypotheses. And I bring that up because, the key thing that really got you and me talking probably years ago now was your idea around how it's not that education doesn't happen, but it's that we get hooked on wrong or incorrect concepts. And that precludes us from further exploration, understanding truth. You would say it much more coherently and consistently, but I'm teeing that up for you to address at this time, sort of the heart and core of your approach to education, clarification, helping us to form better concepts and move forward in our understanding of what is true and right and good versus what might have been classified as evil or ignorance.
Yeah, exactly. And you, Wade, probably know my work as well, if not better than anyone. Sometimes I think you know it better than I do, because and I so appreciate your interest in it, and you're pushing me to do all the things that again I've subsequently done with something or other and elsewhere. But that's right. This concept of good and evil in general supposes that there is such a thing as good and evil, right? That there is a delineation in the first place. Where I've taken a pause with that, and in philosophy, in your first day of philosophy, if you're in a philosophy 101 class and your professor is worth his or her salt whatsoever, the first thing he or she should tell you is that philosophy is about questioning everything, and I mean everything. And yet that is, and you know how, like, frequently, if you're a sports fan, you get a new coach, and the new coach comes in and says, we're going to work on fundamentals, we're going to work on basics, we're going to work on the elemental things that make us a good team. Well, the same thing can be applied to basically just about any skill or any trade that you have. And yet in philosophy, that's just frequently brushed aside, is we make so many suppositions, we make so many assumptions, we make so many concepts and ideas about, we have all of these notions about things that we think are true, that we think are what is, and yet we haven't stopped to question, well, is it? Is that the way that it is? Is there such a thing as good and evil? What is good and what's the delineation? What makes a thing good? What makes a thing evil? What even is that? So you always, and this is probably day 2 in your philosophy 101 class, you always have to define your terms. And this is where it gets really sticky, and this is where people frequently tend to just kind of tune out with philosophy. And I get it, because we've been handed a set of terminologies that we've implemented all of our lives. That these terms have definitions which we ascribe to be actual true realities, where in fact what I say within a philosophical war and some of my other work is that I think we have to look at what our definitions are for everything and see if that really matches up with reality itself, or have we, because of the terms, because of the definitions that we've arrived at, that we've assumed are true and real and valid, have we gone on some strayed path with so many things that then, because one term, one idea, one concept, one notion becomes then a series of other notions, ideas, concepts, and then realities themselves. Because of that pathway, have we taken a completely and totally wrong turn so far as what our very tenuous grasp on reality actually is? And I think we're all aware of the fact that we as human beings have a limited capacity to grasp exactly what reality is in so many ways, shapes, and forms. The most simple idea that we can all probably relate to is a dog whistle. Or wave frequencies of any kind, most of which we can't actually sense, and yet they exist. A microwave, a radio wave, all these things are only, a radio wave, it's out there, it's floated, that's all over the place right now, wherever we are. And yet it's only until you get the signal properly attuned to that wave can you then interact with it. Exactly. Even though you're interacting with it in this otherly kind of sense, because it's there.
Let me pause you there, because that's a perfect segue that I hadn't thought of to try to explain this thing that Paul is getting at. Exercised their senses to discern good and evil. You might say applied their 5 senses to tune them into maybe a different new frequency that they previously were not able to tap into, to discern something fundamentally new and different that was not understood before by that individual, but maybe collectively. I just read this thing about, of course, there's all kinds of stuff about quantum physics and all that, but where there's new theories that are being explored now that have promise and merit, in which the entire universe is indeed an organism that has a collective consciousness and is designed to create and bring about collective consciousness in the way that perhaps Jung, decades ago in his dream interpretation talked about the collective subconscious, right? Something sort of below our awareness, but now that's being externalized and saying, no, it's actually being orchestrated by a supreme intelligence that's spread across the universe. We're all participating in that emerging consciousness and intelligence. So again, some of the ideas like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, his unity principle, his what's it called? The singularity, right? And he was looking at it from not from a singularity of the universe, but of human civilization consciousness. These things are all coming together now as this new improved awareness is emerging, right?
Yeah. So absolutely. And where, I had started off with that point, and I love how you kind of helped to bring it back, was you always have to define your terms. You always have to understand what it is that we're trying to communicate, because my idea of what good and evil is might be very different from what your idea might be, very different from what a biblical idea is. And yet, who determines what the biblical notion is actually supposed to be? So when you have any idea, right, that it's a means by which to communicate and interact with another form of consciousness. That's what ideas are, right? And yet
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. And yet the actual, your, as an individual consciousness, your idea is going to be different, even if you communicate it precisely and clearly and cogently to another individual consciousness, to another person, to whatever. It's going to be slightly different because that other individual consciousness has their own set of experiences and ideas and concepts and things that make them the individual consciousness that that person or just general consciousness actually is. So the ideas themselves, and this is something
differentiated. It's differentiated
right.
through their experiences, their interpretations, their conceptual framework.
Everything. So when we talk about ideas, and we're doing it right now, this is kind of the cool thing. I've said this on the show, I believe, before. It's kind of the cool thing about language itself is that we're working things out in real time. And we don't know exactly what we're going to say, and yet we kind of know where we're trying to go, but yet at the same time, it's not really scripted per se. I mean, you can write a script and say that thing exactly, and then and that's great for TV. But I think the beauty of language is that you're trying to extract something that's in this ethereal, metaphysical realm that isn't really quite tangible, and yet you're pulling that into something that is tangible and is being able to be expressed and expressive in the ways that only you as the individual who's pulling that idea into a linguistic form and then sputtering it back out into the world can do, and in your own unique way. And so in that way, ideas and the exchange of ideas are, again, they're not exactly realities until we make them real through the sort of concretization of pulling that thing from the ethereal sort of other world, right, into our own consciousness and giving it a life from there. And again, this is where you're either philosopher gonna be like, I'm out, right? This is done for me, or this is where your journey with consciousness itself, philosophy and consciousness itself really begins.
Yep. And we're going to go to a commercial break here real quick, but I want to wrap this up with a comment, and that is that we've now taken a step back, one chapter back from the story of the tree in the Garden of Eden to the very first verses, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, right? That thing you're describing, in my view, and the title of this show, Creating the Image of God, is a capacity that we've been given because we've been given the word, we've been given language, we've been given the ability to form concepts. In that garden story, the first task that Adam was given after he was created was to name the animals. And I've correlated that in my own conceptual framework with those early cave paintings from 10, 15, 20,000 years ago, drawing the animals on the caves. As we began to formulate language and formulate words and formulate those concepts around what distinguished these animals from each other, right? And there's, at the animal level, there's maybe a certain distinguishing factor. Is that a friend or is that a foe? Is that prey? And I learned recently through one of our summer camp programs, horses are prey. They are not predators, right? They have eyes on the side of their head to discern their environment and be aware of prey. And so humans, even though we're not predators of horses would view us as predators. So to interact with horses, you've got to be aware of that. At a certain level, the animals have a basic concept, but humans then have taken that and developed it to where we can discern all these different animals, all these different sea species, evaluate the ecosystem to fulfill the purpose, according to the Bible, for which we were put here, which is to dress and keep the garden, which contrasts with that first commandment of be fruitful and multiply, right? Become an invasive species. No, don't do that. Dress and keep the garden. Sorry for sort of bringing this back into a biblical role, but I'm just taking what you're saying and helping make sense of it, maybe for a religious audience who's more versed in those basic concepts.
I think that it's an important thing to delineate here is that, however, because what we were just talking about was as our own individual selves experience things, have our own experiences, have our own ideas, have our own ways by which we engage with reality, and those things define who it is that we actually are. And so you need to take any ideas, any experiences that you have, and build on them in whatever way you feel is necessary for you to do and learn from. So you can take this in a religious context. You can take it in a philosophical context. You can take it in no context at all. It's whatever works for you. So if you have a foundation and a structure that, more leans towards that of a religious upbringing or something that's foundational for you, that's great, right? It's whatever it is that helps you to learn and discern what it is that you're currently intaking within your consciousness, right? So great.
Awesome. And when we come back, we're going to talk about an application of that, as I mentioned at the opening here, in this New Year's revolution, as to where we might differentiate across some basic categories, some disciplines in the field of education, and apply some of this in a very concrete way going forward in 2026. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Joseph Atman from Middle Tree.
Middle Tree got started by a group of educators who wanted to see education done in a different way.
Socioeconomic status is the primary factor in whether a person is admitted to college at present. And we think that that is simply, unfair. And so our mission is to work against that by allowing people from less privileged backgrounds access to the tools that people from more privileged backgrounds are able to have.
The programs that we offer here are tutoring, college counseling, ACT and SAT test prep, and our summer seed program. The tutoring program is unlike any other on the planet that I'm aware of, in that we allow students to be here on a membership basis. Students can come as often as they'd like to without an appointment, and they can be here for as long as they want to.
I really like helping kids understand things that they have been told that they're not good at.
In 6th grade, that's when I noticed my grades started to go up, especially in math. That's usually where I need my help.
I prefer to be able to just have fun with the kids in a way that inspires them to want to learn more and to have fun while they're learning.
The way they do it here, they just have that vibe, if they make it fun.
We don't have a system here, we don't have a workbook, we don't have an actual program. We have individual students, and we approach each and every individual student as individuals.
I love to go finish my homework so I can go home, chill, and just play video games or something like that.
What Middle Tree did for me was it gave me back my time after dinner or before dinner to do things with my son that let me be mom. It gave me back my mom time.
I came here and I finished the year with a B in math, which came up from an F, which I totally think is because of this place. I had A's and B's completely.
We really want to make sure that we're reaching people on their levels.
If you don't understand something, they will help you until you feel comfortable with it.
I like to empower my students to use their voices.
They want you to ask questions, and they want you to learn better than you ever did before.
Really, all we really want are for our kids to be healthy and happy. And I think Middle Tree embraces each kid being their best self, being their individualized self.
Welcome back to the concluding segment of today's show. We're just going to do two for those in the audience who are generally used to three. We skipped that first one around Joe's background, and we're going to have these two extended ones. So right before the break, we were just getting into rubber meets the road kind of application of some of Joe's philosophical work. And one of those things is a collaboration with Planck-Sip, a media company out of Canada, which is going to be focused on higher education and philosophy primarily, which is the niche it's in. We're working with a relaunch of Planck-Sip. What does that mean? Well, it's going to have greater clarity around four main tracks for education, and they are philosophy, religion, ethics, and society. Society being, broadly speaking, the application of those other three and human interactions around those other three. So in that, we are formulating those four tracks and the thought leaders that will be involved in them. Joseph Atman is featuring prominently in that whole mix, taking over from Dan Sanderson, who built and launched Planck-Sip. Again, in those four tracks, we will be developing educational materials, right, to further educate, further expand, and give the platform a focus of deep exploration on these topics live in the form of podcasts, in the form of these live discussions where from the ether, things are being pulled and made more concrete. And then they're being tested in the crucible of not debate. We don't debate on this show, but robust discussion, a willingness to challenge those ideas. But one of the fascinating things about how what we're doing here is nobody's trying to prove that they're right and somebody else is wrong. We're coming to these discussions as seekers seeking answers by, at least this is, and I'd like you to comment on this, Joe. What I like to do is test my theories in the field of contest, not in a debate, but with friendly, worthy, differentiated consciousnesses who can say, well, wow, that's really interesting. I think this, I think that, or yeah, I don't know if I buy that because it's got this or that flaw in it. Joe, what's your comment on that kind of discussion?
Well, I mean, you need to have a difference of opinion and ideas in order to have any kind of spirited debate, and that's the whole point, in fact, of education itself. Which is, I'm going to get slightly on a soapbox here, which is one of the places where I'm really disappointed with so many things that I see in higher academia at this point, is that there seems to be this universal atonal kind of just general voice coming from academia that says, if you don't believe this, if you don't think that, then there is no debate with you. And that's so anti-academic, it's so anti-intellectual, it's so anti-consciousness, the evolution of evolution period, because to evolve with anything, you have to come up against something else, right? You as an individual, you as a movement, your idea has to come up against something. There has to be some conflict. There has to be some opposition in order for growth to actually occur and evolve. And it's one of the things that I'm really disappointed about. And I think it will be, if it's not changed, the ultimate downfall of academia and intellectual pursuit itself in general. But that being said, yeah.
Is that the point of the serpent in the Garden of Eden story?
That is a whole giant bag of snakes, if you'll allow the bad pun. But you could say a lot of things about that, and I don't know how deeply you want to get into that right now. You kind of mentioned earlier, my take on that is something more of a Gnostic take on that, where and the Gnostics really actually revile the serpent as the hero of that story, because the serpent in their interpretation and Gnosticism was decried by the church and really summarily drummed out. Gnostics were drummed out and cast away and ostracized from the church as we now know it today, for in part these kinds of interpretations of things. But their view was that the serpent was really the hero for tuning in humanity to this reality that there is something beyond their current experience, where the biblical figure of Yahweh in the garden had not wanted humanity to become aware of that. So whether or not that was the point of the serpent, and that's up for huge debate. But there are so many roles that character plays in that particular story. We could have a whole podcast on that, or a whole class on it.
Well, and maybe we'll put a pin in that one and come back to it in a future episode, because I don't want to spend the rest of today's show on that one. But it just occurred to me that is where the tension, where the rub enters in this perfection.
Yeah.
And again, the resolution then, as I've pointed out to me with Paul, is that simple oversimplified view of that, we can dive into this later, for me is simply that it wasn't time, right? It wasn't time for them to become completely independent. When we don't want our 2-year-olds to get in a car and and know how to turn the key on, right? But we do want, my 18-year-old daughter, she's been driving my 14-year-old son around all year and taking care of herself to gymnastics and everything. She's still living at home. She's still our daughter, but she's very independent at this point. So there's an evolution and there's a growth period, which is, again, Paul said, strong meat belongs to those who by reason of use, and they've come of age. Now, one of the things that fascinates me, well, actually, yeah, I'll go ahead and go there, is just this idea that time, and again, speaking theologically, speaking in terms of a divine creator, time itself is a gift that doesn't exist in that plane of reality. It's a construct that has been created for us, right? If you take it at face value, that, God said, let there be light, and there was light, and he brought order out of chaos and separated light from darkness, separated the sea, and he put the lights in heaven to rule, greater and lesser lights, the sun and moon on the wall behind me. Those things, as we know from Einstein, are what form space-time. And within this construct, time unfolds such that you can have a spring, or you can have a seed planted in the spring here in frozen Wisconsin. And over a brief period of time, that seed will grow, it will turn into a plant, it will flower, it will become pollinated, it will bear fruit, and the cycle of life goes on. There is growth. We have growth and learning within this construct of time. Time is a gift to us for that growth. That's part of the differentiation, part of, for me, why that serpent might have been put in that garden.
I think it's a really great way to define time, is almost more of a tool. So many folks see time as something that we are more slave to. But I think it's a really interesting perspective to see time as a kind of tool that we use to gain experience. And what that experience isn't always what we prefer it to be. And yet we still have, another moment by which to continue to learn from and grow from and interact with. And this also makes the supposition that time goes only one way in this linear fashion, where, again, this is a whole different conversation as to the nature of time, what time is, how it actually operates. But I think, there's a strong argument to be made. I mean, I don't even think it's an argument. I think it's absolutely and obviously how it operates, is that time can only operate in the way that a certain consciousness is calibrated to observe it. So the simpler way to say that is that it's not so much that we're the slave to time, but that our consciousness unfolds in a way that, again, just like you said, has more to learn from the events that it experiences. And time really is the unfolding of being, the interplay between being and consciousness itself. So I love how you kind of put that in, that like time is a way for us to process and to have an experience, because there certainly needs always to be an unfolding within that interaction between being and consciousness. And again, scientifically, our human experience would necessarily dictate that we have this concept of time, that it moves in a linear A to B to Z fashion. And yet you can only have that experience if your consciousness is attuned to that. If you were
getting back to your analogy of frequencies, we're attuned to interpret that frequency in that way.
Exactly what I'm saying. So like every night when you go to sleep, we don't experience time in the way that we do when we're conscious. That's because there's a different kind of tuning and frequency that occurs when you're in that different conscious state. And yet you're still conscious, but you're not, right? So again, this is a whole different conversation, but everything that we experience is this tuning of our consciousness and the way that we're calibrated to experience whatever it might be, fill in the blank.
I've got to throw out a little.
Time very much included in that.
I've got to throw out a little tidbit now. I mentioned Jung earlier and his collective subconscious and dream interpretation. I don't usually remember my dreams anymore these days. This morning I woke up and I had a very, very vivid dream, and I remembered it, and I told my wife about it. We were in Hawaii over spring break, and we've been back now for a couple of weeks, and we've joked about the fact that nobody wanted to leave Hawaii. We wanted to stay. You can still see a tiny little bit of tan that hasn't disappeared in the rapidly, expanding time here in frozen white wasteland. But the dream was that I woke up in Hawaii and I had been dreaming that the Hawaii vacation was over, right? So, and I was like in my dream convinced, oh, wow, I'm still in Hawaii. And I was dreaming that the vacation was over and I was back in Wisconsin. And that was all just a dream. I just find it hilarious that we're now talking about this. And I mentioned Jung and the collective unconscious and dreams and the fact that we're in a different frequency and time can go forwards and backwards. I just find it, I don't know. It's just interesting. So we're rapidly running out of time on this show. I want you to have the last word. So Joe, this is the first of a monthly series for those in the audience. And Joe and I will be going deep into topics like this, but also unpacking and unfolding the growth of these educational initiatives. If you want like a little tidbit on maybe what to say, that you started talking about being. And the title of your new podcast or the retitling of your podcast is like on being human being or something like that. Maybe that's something to unpack here in the remaining time, or anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah. So thanks for that opportunity. But so we're actually with me coming into the Soup family, the Something or Other family, and into Plank Sip and all of that. That I'm so grateful to be so prominently featured on all of those platforms. We've got the Educate Everyone podcast that we kind of talked about before, that we're going to continue talking about issues within education, having guests on. But there's another podcast that I never intended actually also to be a podcast that I've been doing for years. And when I say years, I don't mean like a couple of years. I mean like 30 years, where I, as a kid, as like an adolescent, as like early teenager, I don't even think I was a teenager, I started recording my thoughts. I was like I've been saying this like the content creator before there were content creators, but I had no platform in which to like put these things out. And then I think this weird thing has happened here recently, especially since I've been kind of faced with this inevitability that this is now, given that I'm within the Soup community, and being so prominently featured, that this is going to come out, or that there is a platform for it, where I've been like, do I really, everybody's already doing this. Like, do I really need to, put my voice into this also? Like, I don't. And yet I've had, some great support with Something or Other and all of that. And so I've got, again, not years, but decades. Not all of them are going to make it into this format, but I've got decades, hundreds and hundreds of hours of me unpacking with myself these philosophical concepts, or just unpacking these day-to-day existential just happenings of being a human being. So that's what I called it. And yeah, I don't think you're going to get a lot of me as a 12-year-old talking about what I thought necessarily, but there's a lot of material, and this is how I actually used to write a lot of my academic papers, and still do actually, and my Substack posts and all that, is I talk something out, because like we said before here just today, I think the beauty of language and the beauty of working things out in real time is that you do extract something that you're not really sure about, and then here this ties all this up, is that we use this beautiful gift and sometimes frequently a curse of time to then take these ethereal kind of notions and abstract concepts and ideas, put them into this block of time, work it out within real time, and then see how we interact with those things once we bring that all into the same realm. And so that's what I do with these dictations. And it's real time working it out. And then there's much neater versions of it that I then will be unpacking and putting into short video forms, within Soup and Plank Soup platforms. And then academic work, which you can read either through the Substack post or on the website or on josephatman.com. Stuff that's already out there is all kind of is the boiled down versions of a lot of those dictations that we're calling being human being. So yeah.
Well, we'll definitely be talking more about that in about a month when we have it back on the show. I'd love to maybe play a snippet of 12-year-old Joe at that point in time as part of our first segment. What were you like as a young man? Well, here, let's listen. This is where my head was at back then. That would be fun.
It is kind of an interesting, because I've cataloged it, right? So it's almost like having an audio journal of yourself in a weird way, right? But I had never intended for any of that to get out. And again, oddly enough, now that there's a platform, not only with Soup and Plank Soup and all that, but just the internet in general, I've balked at the chance for whatever reason. Because again, I feel like, well, everybody's already doing all this. Anybody can get all this, but there might be some value to it, and people might get something out of it. So happy to put it.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. I've got nothing left to do but give the tagline and tee up the sneak peek for next week's show, which is coming up. Joe, we'll have you back in about a month, and I look forward to that very much. Meanwhile, everyone, remember, you are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. We'll see you next week. Here comes the sneak peek. Hello, everyone. Wade Franson here with a sneak peek of next week's episode on Created in the Image of God, 7 a.m. Central, episode 217 on February 1st. I have in the studio a man, Jonathan England, who has built an entire community in Costa Rica. And the show that we had, which I know because it's already recorded, is amazing. Jonathan, what led to you deciding to go to Costa Rica? When was that? Tell us that story briefly.
I met a prophet who lived in a storage shed who gave me a vision and said that God was going to come to me and ask for my life in 3 days. And he said, if I give it to him, he's going to give me favor, but I can never take credit for anything ever again. It happened. I got visions and I saw everything that my life unfold and the reality for humanity unfold before my very eyes. And I said yes to it.
And that's a mouthful. And there's a whole story about you getting into a yellow truck with this guy that you didn't know, and quite terrifying, actually. You'll want to tune in to find out what happened. And that's great that you shared that piece. But what I really wanted to know was the moment when you and your wife heard you need to go to Costa Rica. What was unfolding around you that you didn't really realize was unfolding when that call came?
Yeah, I was... everything was going great. We're building community in Austin, Texas. And then we both heard God's clearly say, you got 1 hour, pack your bags, fly to Costa Rica. We said yes. We went down there here. As soon as we landed, the whole world shut down from COVID. And they said, you need to catch a flight back or else you might not go back. But we're like, God just sent us here, so we have to stay. And then everything birthed from there.
And there you are stuck. Well, we're going to find out a lot more about what led to all this when you tune in next week, February 1st, 7 a.m. for Created in the Image of God with Jonathan England. You won't want to miss this show. We'll see you there.